It's time for Paleo Radio, only on Secular Media Network.
You are now entering Paleo Radio.
Welcome to Paleo Radio with your hosts Jeremiah Bannister and Joe Elder.
Welcome to yet another fantastic episode of Paleo Radio. My name is Joe Elder.
And I'm apparently the more attractive twin to the amazing atheist, Jeremiah Bannister.
I can see the resemblance there. I know you've heard that quite a bit.
Well, it's not only that. I think we need to go on the Maury Povich show, and we need to do one of those paternity tests, because I went to, I think it's areyoutwins.com or something like that. I went and I plugged in a picture of him, and I plugged in a picture of me, and it said 100% that we're eerily identical. And that maybe we should get a DNA test.
Yeah, well, I would say that it is very similar. We are on 95.3 FM, 1680 AM on Public Reality Radio, and we have a great lineup for you guys. We're going to start with how America is no longer a predominantly white Christian nation.
That's going to be a whole bunch of fun, Joe, and that's something you posted on Facebook, actually.
Yes.
Over at facebook.com/Paleo Radio. After that, we're going to be talking about voting. This is an interesting one by Michael Tracy. And if you're not following Michael Tracy on Twitter, I strongly encourage you to do so. He's amazing. He works over at Vice, and you can find him at mtracy. Okay, and he writes an article called "Why These Americans Are Refusing to Vote," and we're going to talk about kind of the arguments for abstention or write-ins or third party or voting for the major two parties, even if you don't necessarily like them.
Absolutely. And I've adjusted my view on this in the last couple of years. I was a little more hardcore about it than I am now. I think that's going to be a really good conversation. And then we're going to finish the show, use the last two segments to discuss WikiLeaks and the DNC leaks, John Podesta emails, just the whole trove of a disgusting mess that's happening there.
and the moral issue.
And the moral issue.
Right? And this is a good debate. And listen, there's going to be a couple things on here. Joe and I don't see eye to eye on a couple of these topics.
Yeah, that's very true.
And we've had a fantastic week. How many hours, Joe? Do you think just talking?
This week?
Just this week. 8 to 10. Just talking behind the scenes, chilling, hanging out, hashing out these issues, because this is deep.
It is more information than people are willing to want to see at this point. And it's not over. You have to think about it too. It's a dripping faucet, so it's going to continuously drop more and more and more as we go. So
I heard there's about 30,000 more emails left to drop.
Yeah. Which is just, that's unbelievable. It's going to take a long time even to go through. Yes. Right. Yes, it is. And that's going to be a good little rant. But first we've reached the end of white Christian America. This is from The Atlantic. The United States is no longer a majority white Christian country, and that is already beginning to have a profound social and political implication. At 45% of the population, white Christians are shrinking as a demographic, and the backlash in many members of these groups against the increasing diversification of America has been swift and bitter. Quote, people fight like that when they're losing a sense of place, a sense of belonging, and a sense of the country that they understand and love. And this is Robert P. Jones, who's the author of The End of the White Christian American. And it's an animated interview. How do they re-engage in public life when they can't be the majority? Which is something
that's a huge question, actually. It's a huge question. And, you know, as I was watching it, because it's a video.
Yeah,
so
it's a video.
If you go and you go to We've Reached the End of White Christian America over at The Atlantic, you're going to see, or just go to the Facebook page at facebook.com/Paleo Radio. You can see it's about, 3.5 minutes long?
Yeah.
And it goes through and it talks about white Christian America and how at one point it was much larger, okay, and now it's down to 45%. It breaks it down even by demographic and shows people who identify as a white Christian, that if you're 65 or older, right, if you're a gray hair, then you are going to definitely, the probability of you being a white Christian is going to be much higher than if you're someone who's a millennial.
Yes.
And they were talking how you go back in time, and what, it was at the time, right now it's about 20%, and it was the inverse. right of that. Like that, only 20% of the country now, or a grand total now, of about 20% who remain unaffiliated.
Yeah, which is a growing number, a much higher number. And I think, too, that the video is very interesting. I like just the general concept about it. And not about what's happening, but what they're trying to tackle of saying, how do people that are used to being in a more privileged position with a more majority position, how are they going to adapt to a society where they don't have those advantages? It's a recognition of advantage one way or the other. Just the fact of how people are struggling to deal with their new societal position, which is a little bit lower than it used to be. And
you're seeing the kickback to it.
Yeah, oh yeah.
I mean, you're seeing a nation in the throes of major demographic changes.
Yes.
I mean, that's what it's talking about when they say, and listen, when I read this, I thought, that's actually a reasonable impulse, a lot of these things. When he says people fight like that when they are losing a sense of place.
Yes.
I mean, that's a very 100% human thing that we afford to everybody. A sense of belonging. We afford that to everybody. And a sense of country that we understand and love. And so all of these are very natural things, regardless of whether or not the group did bad, regardless of whether or not they should change. It's an understandable reaction when a majority group ends up becoming a minority group, and these questions about place or belonging or country and what they love and their traditions is under a microscope.
It is. Well, and I think, too, though, and this is maybe gets onto a touchy issue, but it's basically kind of saying you have to handle a lot of this with kid gloves. These are people that aren't even used to handling everyday disadvantages that other people are, and they are reacting differently to it. And it is understandable. It's understandable in the same, I would say in the same way that if you have a kid who has an overbearing mother who they've adapted to getting certain things from that mom, and she starts to regress and give her attention to other things, that attitude is, I'm not used to the differences that are going on around me right now. I'm going to lash out about it. And a lot of times it happens. And it's an understandable position to have. I think it's warranted. But I also think that the bigger picture, too, is how is the rest of society going to be able to handle and have the conversation with that group about integrating in. This is the first time this group of people has ever had to have someone come to them and say, let me explain what it's going to be like changing things about your culture to adapt to a new one. It's the first time ever. They've always been on the other side of that foot. And so this is it's a new world, I think, for
and that's why I think it'd be true,
right? This is to be we're not talking about this isn't a race issue in total of demographics. I'm talking about white Christians that are used to religious privileges they have in our country that they are really not understanding. For instance, like the Ten Commandments in Oklahoma on the courthouse. There's a lot of people in white Christian America that don't understand why, or they don't understand that it's a little bit of an advantage to have something like that in their courthouse lawn. It opposed to other religions, and they don't like the fact that other religions would have equal say to have those monuments or symbols on the courthouse. That's something that I'm talking about.
I wonder, as I was watching the video, and he was saying that, talking about Christians, and the way he uses the word Christian, I'm curious, because when talking about the Supreme Court, he was saying, he all of a sudden kind of switched gear on it and said, this has changed even on the Supreme Court because we don't have Protestants on there. And I thought that's a sly maneuver because Catholicism is definitely Christian.
Sure.
I mean, let's be real. Even historically, they have more of a right to that claim than maybe anybody except for the Eastern Orthodox. Protestants are like way, way later. Tons of people had lived. And so, who identified with that name. And so I wonder if you include Catholics, if he did or if he did not. If you include Catholics in that list. And I wonder if he included, and as I said, there's a book on this. I mean, it would be good to go and read the book, right? And just to mention again, Robert P. Jones, The End of White Christian America. I wonder who he includes in white.
Yeah.
Like, because...
But even across the board, Catholicism has been taking a hit too, correct? I don't believe that the numbers for Catholics has been staying.
Right, but if he divides between Christian... meaning Protestant, if he does the WASP thing, if that's what he's talking about, right, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, if that's what he's talking about, then that's one thing. I would say it would be more specific than to not say white Christian. It would be better to say white Anglo-Saxon Protestant.
Yes.
I mean, that really would be what he's talking about. And that would be true.
Well, and even,
right?
and I think, too, with the inclusion of Catholics and Protestants into the whole general, America is shifting where non-belief is rising faster than either one of those are rising or staying the same. Where we're seeing a huge non-affiliation movement. And I think that's affecting Catholics and Christians alike, but you're very right on that. Is he talking about all of the religious beliefs surrounding Christianity, or is he just talking about the WASPs? It's an interesting look. I think too, like if you look at places like Texas or in other places of the United States, the WASP group is the group that has those advantages more specifically than maybe Catholics.
You know, I wonder what do we do about the situation regarding place? I mean, that's really where these debates are now. Is you say, okay, everybody's at a table. And actually he mentions this, do they have a seat at the table? And I'm thinking, what does that mean when you still got 45% of a country? I mean,
that's it.
You have a big chunk at the table still. I mean, that's the whole thing as a single block.
Yeah.
And so I said, like, how does that debate flesh itself out so that they really are part of the table, proportionally then, that would define henceforth what place means, what belonging actually means, and that they're not, because they're no longer the majority, they're not marginalized at such a point that kind of a question comes out. Well, do they even have a seat at the table? That kind of a thing. Because that's a popular sentiment that's going around on fringes.
Yeah, well, yeah, because I think I think what that is it's the reaction to losing certain privileges and being treated more equally, to be honest. Like, in terms of equality, that does mean that if you're trying to reach equality on a graph and it's through the middle of the line, the numbers that are on the higher end and the lower end will get a pickup and the higher end will get a pull down. And that actually is the reach to equality. Is that
then it has nothing to do with proportion of demographic.
No, I don't think it does.
But then what are we talking about?
I think we're talking about transition
if it doesn't
to power.
Have anything, but the whole idea of the transition to power in this article is that you have a demographic that's not as big as it used to be. Mm-hmm. And so if the demographic size doesn't matter, then...
Well, I think if we are looking at it racially, yes. If we're looking at it with your race mixed with your religion, that's a group that is, as a demographic, shrinking. And when you're shrinking, you're losing influence, but you're not losing all of your influence. I mean, I think that's the reach and the stretch, where it's kind of like Olympians on the podium. If you're on the number 1 spot, in the number 2 spot and the number 3, and they say, we're going to make this an equal podium. The person in the number 1 spot experiences a step down and says, how do I relate to being on this stage now? That's the reaction, is the loss of certain privilege, I think.
What's your opinion? We're interested. The lines are open, 616-656-1680. Give us a call. What's your opinion about place? What's your position about belonging? Do white people have a seat at the table? We'll be right back right after this.
Love Paleo Radio? Join the club. Support our work by visiting patreon.com/Paleo Radio today.
Back to Eagle and Dragon.
Oh, welcome back to 95.3 FM, 1680 AM, Public Reality Radio. Next topic.
Yeah, lovely next topic. And hey, listen, the phone lines, somebody called. I don't know if it went through. Oh, it's on line 2.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you have 2 calls.
Oh,
goodness gracious alive. Well, okay, you know what? If you call and you get a busy, if you get the busy signal, you know why. But give us a call, 616-656-1680. That's a beautiful surprise, by the way. Yeah. I'm excited about that. All right, do we want to go to line 1? Is this what we want to do? You're on the air. Line 1. Welcome to Paleo Radio.
Hey, Jeremiah and Joe, this is Diane.
Hi, Diane.
Hi, just wanted to mention, I thought it was really, really interesting when you're talking about Christianity versus WASP. And that, especially...
Oh, did we lose you?
Oh, no. I have a feeling that we lost Diane. Diane, give us a call back.
Oh, call us back, please.
We have somebody on line 2?
Sure, yeah.
All right, let's go to line 2. Welcome to Paleo Radio.
Oh, so our two callers call back.
Yeah, our two
this
callers.
This is the loveliness of live radio, as we always joke about.
Yeah, so the phone line's locked up. Look at this. Unbelievable. What's going on? It's got to be a conspiracy, Joe.
That's right.
It's got to be a big-time conspiracy.
Guccifer, what are you doing out here?
We're talking about voting. And again, 616-656-1680. Okay. The voting thing. There's an article, and this guy, I love following him. I just absolutely love it on Twitter. He's one of my absolute favorite. I have him on notification. Great guy, Michael Tracey. You can follow him at M Tracey, Tracey. And he writes over at Vice. Okay, and he has an article called "Why These Americans Are Refusing to Vote." And I'll read just a little bit of this when we just talk about it. In Nevada, residents are afforded a luxury not enjoyed by any other Americans. And by the way, interjection, I didn't know this was real. Okay, I'm excited actually about it. When they trudge to the polls next month, they'll have the chance to check a box that reads, quote, "None of these candidates." Nevada voters are statutorily entitled to signal their discontent with the entire array of presidential contenders before them by saying screw it and then selecting that particular option. And it's not a joke, right? This ultimate FU has actually won various Nevada state primary elections in the past.
Wow. That is fantastic.
We need that.
We do.
All over.
We do. Before we get too far into this, though, we have Diane calling back. Diane, welcome back to the show.
Hi. If you say none of the above, does nobody win and they have to start over again?
I need to know this.
That's an interesting thing,
right?
Isn't it?
Okay,
yeah,
well, I called before because I was really interested in the distinction between Christianity and WASPs, and especially when Joe mentioned Texas, because there's a lot of Catholics in Texas because the Hispanics and immigrants are Catholic.
Good point. Yeah, that is a very good point. Well, and I think that plays into what we were asking, though, too, is when he's talking about white Christian, yes, but that doesn't mean that different races don't have Christian views that are in America, which I think is kind of another angle. That's a good thing to bring up, Diane.
Yeah, correct. It seems because a lot of immigrants are not Christian, and it does seem to turn into a racial thing, doesn't it? Yeah,
that's kind of what I was saying. Is with white Christianity going down, that doesn't necessarily mean that Christianity entirely is falling out in America, because I think a lot of the people that immigrate, especially the number one country or the number one area where people are immigrating from, is a Catholic group.
I know this is edgy to say, but it'd be a real consideration to say it's a trade-off for white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Christianity for brown Christianity.
Well,
and that would be, and that's a different kind. It's a different brand. I mean, and if you have a demographic shift, the way that we are, that's something that people just have to calculate and kind of anticipate, in fact.
Right, and a lot of immigrants, people from, somewhere else where family was a bigger thing, I heard that the Muslim vote really went to the Republicans when they first get here.
Yeah.
But then, with Trump making all those statements, it's now going to the Democrats. So it's really different when it's an immigrant that's the religious grouping.
Yes.
Because they have different values.
Yeah, and I think, too, that plays into, the fact that the book that he was writing is focused on a racial demographic mixed with a religious demographic, and it is worth noting that how much is the trade-off? Like you say, Jeremiah, we have a huge group of nons, like we're talking, that are growing too, but there also is the highest amount of people that are immigrating into the U.S. are not of a different religion than Christianity, if at all.
They're a different flavor. Yeah. They've got their own unique ideas regarding. I mean, Catholicism in Mexico is even strikingly different from Catholicism in the United States.
Sure, it is.
I mean, it has. Those are just cultural,
because of
geographical things, historical things that develop over time, and so that's a real trade-off. And I think it's going to be interesting to see the evolution of the party system, and assuming the two parties will remain. Right? No matter the rocking and reeling that's going on now, they're going to stay for a little while. Okay, It's going to be what it is. And and I'm kind of stuck on this, Diane, is the idea of Marshall McLuhan, the media theorist, back in the day, and he's talking about the retribalization of man based on as an inevitable result of electronic speed. and that when we can begin to communicate and we begin seeing original source material from people that we in the past have been against, and we have their visibility where we see them more, they're more relevant to our station in life, that as that happens, you're going to have changes in your culture, but those changes in the culture are going to reshape political allegiances.
Yeah, I like the word you chose, the flavor, because that's really, these people that want the good Christian, when they might not want that Christian over there.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's a great point.
Who wants to keep who in power is really the situation, not who believes what.
Yes. I think that is a very astute point.
Well, thank you so much for calling. Definitely appreciate it. We love it every time.
It's great that you're on live, too.
Oh, thank you. We're trying to change. Listen, I know we've been shouting this out for, a couple weeks now.
Yeah.
Saying we're trying to get to a weeknight spot. That's our hope, our ambition, and to extend it from 1 hour to 2.
Yeah, that would be our goal, and I think it would be best so we could cover a couple topics, because we found that going live means we can only do 3 topics at most.
Yeah.
Because you get people like me interrupting you all the time.
Yeah, you're not. Yeah.
Which is great. It's a very, I think it's a wonderful and accepted and invited interruption.
You're one of our favorite interruptions in the world.
Thank you.
All right, yeah.
The best thing I've ever heard.
Oh, thanks. See you later, Diane.
So, this whole thing, getting back to Nevada, and we love you, Diane. Seriously, you're amazing. And she's been listening for a long time.
Yes, she has.
And she's a big supporter of this station. So, this article by Michael Tracy, Why These Americans Are Refusing to Vote. I did not know anything about this whole Nevada situation.
Yeah.
And how Nevada says you can vote for none of these candidates. And I thought, this really cuts to the heart of what my big contention is. Because I got in a conversation with Randy Lamonda on Twitter. He's a supporter and follower of the program for a long time. And we get in a conversation, and he was asking about it if I defend people's right to completely abstain. And I said, yes, I do. If they don't want to vote, and I defend their right to continue criticism even if they don't vote. I defend their right to do that. Because I defend people's right to criticize the national anthem even if they don't stand for it. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the point of freedom. You can be apathetic if you want. Mm-hmm. Right? That's the reality of the situation. At the same time, that big blob of apathy that's out there, when you vote and you don't have any kind of statement at all, you just simply don't vote. You stay home. You can't really distinguish very well and disentangle the people who don't vote out of principle, who feel alienated, who say, I don't like these candidates, and they have their reasons, from people who go, oh man, I didn't know we were voting today.
Exactly.
And you can't disentangle those two different things. And so I've always found it to be better if you go and you write in. I find it preferable if you vote for a third-party candidate. If you don't want to vote for the major parties, if you say, I can't bring myself to do it, write somebody in, vote third party, but if you don't, you have to accept that your principled stand is making it hard for us to see your principled stand.
It blurs,
yes, hard.
That's a great point. And it seriously blurs the line between, well, we know what the rhetoric is. Democrats will say every time they lose an election, when obviously less than 50% turnout, because that's our country, we know for a fact we just don't turn out. So unless than half do, the argument Democrats always lob up into the air is, well, look at all these liberals that sat at home and were disengaged. And then when the Republican loses, what do they say? Look at all these Republicans that sat home and were disengaged. And they claim that group of nons, and that's a great point. We have Brenda calling in from GR. How are you doing, Brenda?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Good. What did you want to add to the conversation?
Well, I wanted to hear what you think about the statue of Satan that was put up and the demographic that represents and the place where the Ten Commandments was taken down, because I believe that was what was behind the push to have the Ten Commandments taken down, and what your thoughts are on that.
Well, and real quick, because I think this is a great point, too. And what you're talking about is the Oklahoma City courthouse had the Ten Commandments up. Mm-hmm. And as a point of contention, a Satanist temple pushed to have Baphomet, a statue of one of their religious icons, placed on the courtyard, too, in defense of religious equality and saying that, look, if they get to have this up here, we do, too. I think they did it as a symbolic gesture to make things awkward, to show it turns the tide. It's kind of like when someone says "in Allah we trust" gets put on your money, and that tinge that people feel is like, that's why we kind of are a little odd about saying "in God we trust" on our money too. It's a way of turning the mirror, I think. I don't think that the Satanist temple was extremely content with really wanting to have Baphomet up there and really make it. I think they did it to show how different it was for Christians wanting to put their symbols up there.
And how it really isn't about... I think that they tested the argument that putting 10 Commandments there is not a unique privilege to Christian people. And that they say, oh no, it is, because if you have any challengers at all on this, if you have any challengers on it, then you are going to be so uncomfortable, because beneath your idea of simply saying, I just think it's a good thing to put up here, behind that is your idea that this is the one true God, and that one true God is the only one that deserves the respect of our state.
Exactly.
But our state isn't built that way. Our state doesn't have that idea. That's why people can, even within Christianity alone, you can be a Trinitarian and believe in the Father, Son, Holy Ghost, or you can believe that Jesus only, or anything like that. You have diversity in there, and they don't always agree on how that should be done. So I think it's a wise decision. Thank you for the call. We'll be right back. 616-656-1680.
Now back to Joe and Jeremiah.
We're mega dope on Twitter, and if you don't follow us, you're totally a cuckoo bird.
That's right.
So you got to go ahead and do that. You can follow us at Paleo Radio Show. You can follow me on my personal one at Paleocrat, Paleocrat.
And you can follow me at Joe Elder Comedy. That is with 2 E's, JoeElder Comedy.
We wanted to thank the previous caller. What was her name? Brenda. We wanted to thank Brenda for calling. It's an interesting question, talking about, if you're just now tuning in, she asked about the statue of Baphomet and about the Satanists that are activists in different states around the country. And you can see through their tactics that they use, like when they were in Florida, there was an after-school program or whatever that was going through that had to do with Christianity, and they wanted to make it so that they were recognized as well. And it put people in an awkward position where they're like, well, what that does, and I briefly mentioned this, but it's a point that needs to be stressed, is that what that does is it reveals what that debate really is about.
I agree.
And because that debate, they say, well, we should have the right to put it here, we're a Christian nation, or, we should have the right to put it here, there's more of us. And that kind of plays into our first topic.
We have a head count.
A head count, yes. But that's not the way that the law works. That's the way that personal bias works.
Yes.
That's the way if you have a totem, if you have your team, you want your team not just to do good, but you want your team to be the team for everybody, then that is how that works.
And go ahead.
So if you have an organization that goes, listen, I think that's what's really going on here, and we can verify this or falsify the claim by going ahead and trying to have equal access and say, yes, constitutionally we have the right for this, and they know it. And so we're going to invoke it, and we're going to put something up there that makes it look a little bit more like Rome than it does like Jesus land. Because in reality, we are much more like Rome than Jesus land. We have a lot of Jesus land inside Rome here, but legally speaking, right, our legal construct is specifically regarding how religion has access, the no religious test, that people have the right to believe what they want to believe, and there's all these diverse ideas about belief, far more entrenched in Western ideas that are not affiliated with the Old Testament, especially anywhere around the Ten Commandments.
Well, it's a great point. We definitely have more of a Roman, in terms of our legality, not in terms of what people truly believe, but how we respect what people believe. We definitely have a more pagan view than we do a Western Orthodox view. We have Rick calling in from GR. This is a good friend of mine. How are you doing, Rick?
Is this Joe?
Yes, sir, it is.
Haven't heard you in a while.
Oh yeah, every Saturday at 2:00.
Yeah.
They replaced you on you and what's his name, Jim?
Yes.
Darren replaced him.
Yes. Well, we ended up.
New co-host.
A lot of it had to do with the fact that Jeremiah and I working at Paleo Radio was taking up a heavy bulk of the time, and so I decided instead of having 2 shows, I had to dedicate myself to one.
And it's a good shout out, a good time for a shout out to Southpaws here on WPRR.
Yeah, and Jack is great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or somebody who was critical of the program called it soft pause.
Uh-huh.
I says, well, that doesn't sound too bad to me. That reminds me of a cat, But anyway, about this business of the Ten Commandments. So the Ten Commandments, strictly speaking, since it was in the Old Testament, is not really Christian at all. It's Jewish. And, of course, a lot of those things, you could quibble about all of the Ten Commandments, but, a lot of them just have to do with things that even secular people would agree is a good thing. You shouldn't steal or murder.
Yeah, but I mean, if I'm secular and I get my dibs on the 10 Commandments, I'd like a re-edit and put the you can't own people as one of the 10. And
I understand.
And it has to do with the intent of where it belongs in the belief. Like you're totally right. It's more of an Abrahamic religion, a symbol of Abrahamic religions than it is of just Christianity. But particularly in our country, the Abrahamic religion that we buy into is Christianity with the Old Testament included and Jesus and New Testament, the whole shebang.
Well, and let me correct you, Rick. I hate to do this, but the 10 Commandments, here we go. I am the Lord thy God. Okay, so that's the first one. It's summed up with that. Thou shalt have no other gods. That's the other one. No graven images or likeness. That sounds
dedicated
like pretty Muslim.
To me.
It sounds like something you'd hear with ISIS. Not take the Lord's name in vain. Nobody gives a rat's rear end about that. Remember the Sabbath day. There's no agreement even over, and keep it holy. Honor your father and mother. Now, honor them. It depends.
I'd say 50%. 5 through 10 are decent.
Thou shalt not murder, and don't commit adultery. It's a bad idea. It's a bad
idea if the husband finds out. But anyway,
that's a bad right. So, but you have the situation where you say, hey, a significant number of these things here really just don't have anything to do with American life unless you are actually a believer in that thing. And so you say, well, it's got a couple good ideas on there, but a lot of those seem really like you kind of have to buy that particular view.
Sure.
Coveting, you think coveting is a bad thing? I don't think that's such a bad thing, really.
No, but I also don't think, per the argument that you're using, we could actually look through the Quran and find things that we think are good and testaments into the Quran. Well, and Ten Commandments is also in there as well. It's not like Moses was not included in the Quran.
Also, when you talk about in God we trust, well, God, and I know you guys know this, I'm not trying to talk down or anything, but the word God is actually a generic term. Now, if you were going to say Jehovah or Allah or Thor, Jupiter or Zeus, that would be specific. Then you might have an argument. But what's wrong with saying God?
I still have an argument because it's implying that all people have a belief in something above them, which most people, or not most, but a good majority of people, or a growing group, don't have a belief system like that and don't have anything. What you may view as a gap, they don't. They just say, I lack the facilities to have a need for that, for the need of the higher power. And if you say under God, you're acknowledging that everyone in a way just has to have this belief that that's there.
What about a non-anthropomorphic type of God, as Paul Tillich, the philosopher, talked about the ground of being? It doesn't have to be an old man in a beard.
Yeah, it just has to be something bigger than you that runs everything that a lot of people don't condone or agree with.
Yeah. Do you believe there's a higher power of some sort in the universe than human beings, Joe?
Not an organized one with thought, no.
Really?
Not at all. No, I don't.
Well, we are in bad shape then.
No, I think things come from natural processes and natural laws that haven't been inherently given by anybody.
And I know a lot of people who've got magical eyeballs who are able to see into realities that no one else can.
Well, I'm not saying that.
Well, I mean, we can kind of theorize about what strings are. Right, but there's criticisms people have that say, man, you can't see them. It's kind of lost in the numbers on this, the way you're defining these things. And people are going even deeper than that. They're going even deeper, and yet feeling they can evade that criticism.
But do you think a lot of this is just what you might call what am I trying to say here? In other words, the human race is so egotistical that they think they're it. They're the most supreme entity in the universe. That may not be true.
I totally agree, which is why it would be better to have things like "In God We Trust" just entirely off of our money and our tender and our currencies, and then that way we don't have to worry about the conversation with it.
And I can't imagine.
Really the point of legality, I guess, is like I disagree with it on a philosophical sense for myself, but really the reason why it doesn't belong there is because of the laws that were written by the people that were founding the country about how we are neutral about picking sides with deities or even acknowledging that deities are there. They reserve that right to the people to decide and said anything that we're handling is from a neutral standpoint. Anything you'd like to do on a private sense is entirely your own accord.
Right.
And I think I agree with that notion.
Yeah. And I think I've shared only one or two posts in my entire life about "In God We Trust" on money, and I think one of them was a joke where it talked about all the triangles and the Illuminati symbolism.
Yeah.
You know, and so I say, hey,
I agree. Like
it is what it is, and I say, here's the thing. I would say, number one, not everybody believes that. It's totally true, but I also think that there's probably such a small number of people who in their day-to-day affairs say the fact that that's on the money has a real indication as to how I behave as a citizen or spend my money or anything.
I don't think anybody gives a thought to it. They just want more of it.
Well, that's what I'm saying. And so you say, well, if that's the case, then at best it's superfluous. It's unnecessary to have.
I think what it is it's indicative of a system. It's the same reason why saying it's the same. It comes from the same ilk of, well, having the Ten Commandments on the lawn. Most of us agree with what's in the Ten Commandments, even if we're not religious. It's saying that what you see in the general system is that it has a leniency towards one way of thinking when it claims to be neutral, which is what people I have noticed and recognized.
I think that in our society, especially in the political realm, people like Trump and Hillary Clinton, well, if you ask them, are you Christians? And they'll say, yes, of course. But certainly in the case of Trump, and maybe even in the case of Hillary, I highly doubt that. I think they're just very, very power-hungry, somewhat megalomaniac people, and I doubt very much if either one of them gives a whole lot of thought to what God, who they claim to believe in, wants in their lives. And, I think that, I think, let me ask this now. I assume both of you guys are...
We'll have to, this one real quick, and then we'll have to go.
Well, okay, then I'll take the answer off here.
Okay.
I'm assuming that you not only don't believe there's no God, but you don't believe there's no such thing as, or you don't believe there's any such thing as Satan, too, correct?
Absolutely, yeah.
Of course not.
No, I don't believe in good or bad ghosts.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Rick. Thanks for the call.
That's an interesting thing, and I watched a video. Oh my gosh, what is her name? Super popular YouTube, Jacqueline Glenn. I watched Jacqueline Glenn, and she's being, I think was it Jesse Lee Peters, and he goes, "You don't look like a Satanist, or you don't look like an atheist." And she's like, "What do you mean look like an atheist?" He's like, "Well, but you do believe in Satan, right?"
Yeah,
and she just kind of looked at him, and it was a very interesting thing. But there's a lot of people, and even with Satanists, that say, "Well, those Satanists believe in Satan; they're trying to make Satan go on there." If you ask a Satanist if they believe in a real diabolical Satan that's going around doing nasty things and stuff like that, they would say, "No, that's not what we believe in."
And I think too, when you have my point of view is not necessarily we're saying that it's not anti-religious. Is I have a naturalist point of view of all things. So even when someone says, "Do you believe in ghosts, Joe?" I say, "No, we don't have verifiable evidence." When people say things, there's things where things have been turned around too. But once we have verifiable evidence, I'm absolutely willing to adjust my beliefs. But until then, I say no.
And we've mentioned a guy on Twitter who said he had special equipment that was able to see that diseases and sickness and stuff like that was actually a black substance.
Yes,
that is karma. And I say we chuckle at that, we laugh at that. Yeah. But the idea that there is a supreme being, whether personal or impersonal or anything like that, is even further extended. Then, it's in the same ballpark. That's what I'm saying. Like, it's a person saying, hey, I have special instruments, whether faith or whatever it might be, that allow me to see into kind of this other place where I'm really confident that there's this thing that nobody's ever seen or heard or touched or tasted or smelled or anything. We can maybe imagine it, but that's about it.
That's right. And if I remember correctly, my response to that person was, gee, you know more about the unknown than anybody else on Earth. So it just goes to a good point. We're going to continue the conversation about third-party voting, not voting at all, and also WikiLeaks.
For debates, interviews, or speeches, contact Paleo Radio Show at gmail.com.
You love to hate 'em, you hate to love 'em. You just can't get enough of 'em, you sick freaks. Paleo Radio's on the air.
Absolutely love that intro. Thank you, Nathan Downing-Fennessy. Great man. We are back on Paleo Radio, and we have been talking about third-party voting, non-voting at all, and people's reasonings for doing it.
And whether or not they're able to criticize, right? Whether or not after you decide not to vote, because you hear that all the time. You know that, well, if you don't vote, then you're not allowed to talk. And I agree with Ron Paul here, actually. It was a quote in this article where he says, if people don't think voting is worthwhile, they shouldn't vote. This whole obsession with your vote makes all the difference and everyone has to vote is propaganda. In a free country, you have the right to be apathetic. And like I said, if I defend somebody's right to criticize things like the national anthem and say, hey, you can criticize that. You don't have to even stand for it to criticize it. You can just simply, whatever, you can kneel down. That you don't have to go out and say, this doesn't represent me, and then be told to shut up by people who, by and large, agree that the person who's in power doesn't really even represent them.
That's right.
That's the strongest argument is, and it's the most common, most frequently cited one. You need to hold your nose, and you need to go in there, and you need to suck it up, and you need to vote for this candidate. And that way, when this candidate wins, then you can complain about him.
Yeah.
That's the weirdest thing I've ever heard in my life, and I hear it every single election. It is ad nauseum.
I know that I'm probably going to get in trouble for going down the path I'm going to go down here, but I think it's akin to people saying, you have a right to own a gun, every American should have a gun. And people go, whoa, we should have some sort of vetting process or understanding about the people that come in and do it. And I'm that way too. I must admit, folks, I have a William Buckley elitist sense of voting where I say I believe that most people are so uneducated that their involvement, being this ignorant, is not worth their involvement. And I boldly will say that, and I know that a lot of people get a tinge in there, but listen, if you don't know who your senator is, you don't know who your congressman is, you don't know if your governor is a Republican or a Democrat, should I really think it's a benefit to my country to have you come in and vote?
And that's the purpose for the team sport. Is that people can say, well, and that was one of the reasons there was a lot of complaints over whether or not you could vote straight party ticket, is that a lot of people simply don't study it.
I have a serious contention with straight party ticket as well.
Right.
I think that's a lazy man's game. You got to know what you're doing to do it, and I agree with that across all boards. When I say it with the gun rights thing, I say it because let's start in another angle. When you're talking about people not voting, I agree with it too, because I a lot of times I bring Pericles up, the old philosopher, who says just because you don't take an interest in politics doesn't mean politics won't take an interest in you. And so the fact that I'm not voting doesn't mean I'm not affected by what happens, so I can still talk about it. I can still say how I feel about it, whether I'm engaging in the policy or not. I'm still affected by it, so I have a right to say what I want, whether I engage in voting or not. I really think people, just from being in the apparatus that is America, if you're in that apparatus, whether you choose to engage in the political system or not, you definitely have a right to voice your opinion about it, talk about it, think it's wrong. And I know some people would say that contradicts with me talking about people being ignorant, but I think that's the building of getting rid of ignorance, is people that constantly talk about it and discuss it, even if they aren't engaged in the political process.
You know, there's two things I'll say, and then we definitely need to talk about WikiLeaks for a minute.
We do.
In this article here by Tracy, he says, the September before every presidential election, the pollster Gallup asks respondents whether they plan to vote. And this year, just 47% of people aged 18 to 34 say they will definitely vote. That's down from 74% in 2008. And then Jill Stein, she has a quote. She's the third-party candidate for the Green Party. Okay. If people are being thrown under the bus by a political system, as they are right now, I think it's hard to fault them for not wanting to vote for political predators. The emphasis needs to be not on the voters who are the victims of a predatory system, but on this system, which is making a mockery of democracy.
I totally agree with that.
That's a valid point.
It's a very valid point.
Yeah, I mean, and it gets back to that whole, when you tell somebody to just hold their nose, be a big boy, pull the pants up and go vote for the person you are scared of maybe, or that you hate. Because the people on the right and the left say it. It's not just like one team says that resorts to that. Both teams use that as a ploy. But if people sit there and say, hey, I legitimately feel like that we are completely, radically disconnected, right? Radically from any kind of instruments of power where we can make a difference, where it's cynical even for Obama to talk to a protester and say that instead of doing that, they should write a letter to the White House. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's so cynical. Joke. It's a joke. I mean, he could have thrown some quarters on the ground and said, go buy a lottery ticket. It's true. Yeah. It's true. And so both those things, I think that people have a right, like you, I think people have a right to abstain. I think that there should be a societal expectation that if people go and vote, that they know at least who they're voting for or why they're voting for that person. And if they don't, and they say, well, I generally like Democrats, they're allowed to go ahead and do that. And they say, hey, I generally like Republicans or Libertarians, whatever you want, but to approach it with a degree of seriousness. You can't treat it like it's the most serious thing that everybody's got to do and then not have a societal level of expectation regarding the excellence of that one has in their knowledge of candidates when they approach the voting. It's to me, that's just Looney Tunes.
That's exactly what I'm talking about right there. I think those are fair expectations where we say, I think it's kind of a half jab to do just come out and vote. It like you said, come out and vote, but know what you're doing when you're voting there, and having just a general sense of who you like is all I'm asking for. I mean, and I think that you have a lot of people that are disengaged, and even though they know that Trump and Clinton are running, they still don't have any intention of voting and aren't looking at anything that's going on. And this is probably a great transition to say that everybody's got their blinders on that's ready to vote because they've already hunkered down. I mean, people are in their foxholes at this point, especially because what we've seen with WikiLeaks, and if that's not at least changing some people's view of what Hillary Clinton is,
they're not reading them.
They're not reading them. Yeah. They're simply not reading them. I mean, I think that's
But it
true.
brings up a moral question on the WikiLeaks thing. And actually, as I was preparing for this, because you and I talked about it, and then I was like, I want to go see, people debate this on a video or something. And I found that, what's his name, man? Christopher Hayes.
Chris Hayes. And I poke shots at that guy all the time. I shared a GIF with him in it and had hearts all over it that were like beating and stuff. It's hilarious, making fun. But he's in a debate with Glenn Greenwald. And they're debating, it's not so much the debate, and I think that Christopher Hayes, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but I think that the argument wasn't so much that reporters should report on it, like regardless of where the source comes from, because Greenwald made some fascinating claims saying that journalists, he's like in journalism, and this is a media theory question, is that they don't care where the sources are from. That they say if the information, they need to vet the actual information, that you don't shoot the messenger. That's kind of, I guess, the summation of the point. So he agreed on it, but the question then became a moral one. What do you do as a citizen? Yeah.
And as a journalist, are you partially divided? Is there a sense of patriotism? Like Penn Jillette. He's real patriotic. Doesn't really want to look at him.
Patriotic position of him.
Yeah, it's a real patriotic position. And so say, hey, that's a real thing. It's a real factor. But should people say, I'm not going to look? And what should we do if these things are released? Let's say it's a hacker. Let's say it's somebody who's a mischievous person. It's somebody who's maybe a foreign government entity that releases these things. But let's say that these things are actually panning out to be true, that you can encrypt it. You can use cryptography in order to verify whether these things have been changed or altered. What does it do when those are thrown into the public discussion?
Well, I think you have to take a two-prong attack, and to lay on one side or the other too heavily is to make a mistake. So the two-prong attack is, number one, you have to address what you're seeing. The reporters, like you said, reporters certainly have a right. Reporters certainly have a right to report on what they are getting, and even if the sources are there, a lot of times it's the expectation of journalism that I think we dance around here, because what will happen is when we talk about WikiLeaks, we'll get into morality of it, and then we get into the real situation of it, and then we try to apply those two things. I think that the morality situation says that you have to vet your sources. The reality of it is journalists don't vet their sources very well, and something like WikiLeaks, if you say that they're reckless, which I do, I think that WikiLeaks is oftentimes reckless. They're no more or less reckless than any other journalist that would report out on it, because they too don't seem to vet their sources very well.
Or they make sure that a lot of Americans aren't implicated in the Panama Papers. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of a thing. And it brings up the debate over censorship, that they can that they can make sure that a lot is redacted. Let's say there was a private discussion where somebody was wanting to commit suicide. Right? That's in the Podesta emails, that one of the people at the Clinton Foundation, top-level person, felt that they were being so maligned and kind of beat around by Hillary and by Chelsea that they simply couldn't take it anymore. And they were at the edge of the waters in a car and contemplating suicide. Should that have been in there?
I don't think so.
Should it have been redacted? And I agree. And so let's say that we go ahead and we redact that. The only problem, and I mentioned this before, and I don't know if you disagree with me, but that if we agree and say that these media institutions, whether WikiLeaks, New York Times, Washington Post, Guardian, whoever, if they redact this stuff rightfully, and we entrust that they're doing a good job with that and they're trying to live up to that, then we have to accept that the argument that's often launched at these things that says the knee-jerk reaction to people getting busted is to say, well, but a lot of it's redacted, you can't tell. They redacted this, and say that's a catch-22, because you demanded that there be redactions, but then now that because there's redactions, your very first argument in your knee-jerk response is don't trust it because there's redactions.
Yeah. Well, and I think, too, that it has to do with there's intent with morality as well. And I think that point of the redaction is a very good one, is you say, well, if you do redact it, then people say you're tampering with it. But I would say, too, that if you say my company's job is to take information that's highly sensitive from shoddy sources that I don't vet, and I just bulk dump them, I'd say, yeah, you're reckless. But you're valuable, but you're reckless. I mean, that's why I mean by two-prong, it's two in the same. Because I think you can be used when you're that way. I think you can be used by more organized institutions to do things at certain times and in certain time frames to get results that you want, when you're not involved in the policies that are made in other countries. Like, for instance, the Panama Papers, it's a global argument that U.S. hackers did that because of the sense that the Americans were protected, and it was all about Russia. Now, 2 months later, we have what is to be assumed, and I know people think this is propaganda. I think that there's a lot to it, that Russia did some counter-espionage and hacked into the DNC files and Podesta emails and released them to WikiLeaks at the same time to affect things that are going on in our place, and withheld things that they may have taken in.
And they may be playing that game.
Because there's not...
I'm more skeptical of it.
Is there any Podesta emails about their intents on their relationships to Russia that have been openly lifted? There's a couple with John Podesta.
Well, yeah,
those weren't those FBI files, not Podesta's emails.
Right, Podesta's emails talk about a kind of a shell group, this kind of hollow shell that his daughter made in order so that he could have a whole bunch of shares in uranium.
Folks, this
that's
is
connected
so bad.
Connected by the way to the sale that took place that was facilitated and negotiated by the Clinton Foundation.
Not by the Secretary of Defense government, but by the Clinton Foundation. Like, guys, that's what I mean, everybody, by thinking about the breadth of how deep this stuff is. We're talking about Russia hacking it too, but we're also talking about John Podesta being intimately involved with trading uranium to Russia. Like, this sounds like the Twilight Zone, but it's indeed very, very real.
Things outside of our control that make you feel like the Twilight Zone. There's the music, Joe. The show's over.
The show is over. We are going to continue this WikiLeaks discussion next week. There's no doubt about it. If you guys want to chime in next week, 616-656-1680. Thank you guys very much for listening.
And make sure go to patreon.com/Paleo Radio and Spreaker.com/Paleo Radio Show.
We will see you all next week.
You've been listening to Paleo Radio, exclusively with Secular Media Group.